With us in the Gibbs studio now is Professor Amon Chizema from Loughborough University in the UK, but formerly from Zimbabwe. Professor, welcome to Gibbs, welcome to AOM in Africa. Let me start off by asking you what brought you to this conference at this time?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. The very first thing I would say is that when I heard that it was in South Africa, I thought, well, at last Academy of Management has decided to become global, because I've spent the past 10 or so years attending these conferences, and I used to go to the US quite a lot. And I remember once at a conference in Atlanta, I came out and met a few Africans and started talking, and I said, it feels as if when they talk of the world, Africa is not part of the world, because you don't hear any word mentioned in the sessions. So when I heard he's going to South Africa, I said, wow, I can't miss the opportunity. I've got to be there when it starts.
Has it lived up to your expectations?
Very much so. I should say that it has actually gone beyond what I expected. It has been an excellent journey of learning, and more so especially for our colleagues from Europe and America to see what Africa is about. Because sometimes there's a misconception about what really happens in Africa, and I think from that point of view, I think it has been a great success.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because you teach in the UK, you teach obviously classical business theory to undergraduates and graduates, of course. Yeah. Does it apply to Africa, or does it really need contextualizing? Is Africa somehow different?
Yes, well, I think the first thing I should say about that is, in the past, there's been a poor understanding of how management should be taught and should be applied in different contexts. But I think as I speak now, there is a clear realization that the institutional context in everything that we do should be the first thing that one should consider. So most of the principles that have been taught in business, unless they are properly adopted and adapted to the institutional environment, they will not make sense. I'll give you as an example. In the 90s, there was a program run by the International Monetary Fund, referred to as the economic adjustment programs. These programs did not work, partly because the IMF came with a template, if you like, or a model, an economic model, which had worked in the West, and they tried to bring it over here, and it just didn't work. But then I think now there's a clear realization that the first thing that you've got to understand is the context in which you're operating, and then try to adjust some of those theories. I should say they're very good theories, but they need a bit of adjustment when it comes to Africa.
And the other question then is, what can Africa teach the West?
Well, I am glad you asked that question. I think there's plenty we can teach the West. In the first instance, we have so many practices that have gone unwritten, that have gone unrecorded, that have not been produced even in academic sphere, nor in practice. We have so many practices that really bring people together. The issue of team building, for example, which is taught in management, can really be taught from an African perspective. In Africa, we have this spirit of Ubuntu, which is a spirit of oneness, which is a spirit of acknowledging each other. I think these are some of the values we can transfer to the West. I will give you a typical example. My wife is a teacher in England, and she teaches in a school where there are many problems. And one of the stories she came home with one day was that there was a fight in a classroom. Kids were fighting. And a male teacher, separated these kids. And the next thing that this teacher heard from the parents was they were going to sue him because he had manhandled the kids. Now, I'll tell you something about Africa. In Africa, if you see a kid playing on the road doing nuisance, being naughty or something like that, there is this perception or this idea right from early years in the African context that as an adult, it's your responsibility to tell that child to behave well. You don't do that in Europe. That, for a start, is something that Africa can give to the world. And there's many more, I'm sure, from the realm of management, from the realm of the way we lead our day-to-day lives that we can teach you.
I know that you've been out on a couple of the learning journeys at this particular conference.
Yeah.
Is there any image that stands out for you?
Yes. I mean, as an African, the thing that really struck me the most is when we visited Soweto. I'm not so sure if it's really part of Soweto, but there's a place called Clipton. And what I saw there was not something that I expected to see in a country that is independent, in a country that has seen independence since 1994. what I saw there was rather disturbing, and especially for somebody who comes from Zimbabwe, where I've seen that the problem of the gap between those who have and those without can end up being a disaster if not properly managed. So what I'm talking about here is the economic gap between the rich and the poor. I mean, the state in Clipton is really way below what human beings should have as standards of living.
And what are you going to be taking back to Loughborough, either for your own research or for your students?
Well, I think the one thing I'm going to do is honestly make sure that some of this work that is being done in this project. Actually, I challenged a faculty member from Gibbs, and I said, well, you've taken us to all these places. Are you incorporating this stuff in your research? They said, well, we're not doing it as yet. And I think it's very important to make case studies from some of those stories, because what you see in those places is a high sense of resilience. You see people who are going through hard times, but at the end of the day, they have a big smile on their faces. They have something to look forward to. And I think the concept of resilience, which I see from there, is something that I can actually take back and use in my classes. And also, there is also the idea that these people are working with very limited means, and yet they're trying to make something out of it. Now, we have situations in Europe, for example, or in England, for example, where I'm coming from, where students take education for granted, for example. I think these are some of the things I could take back in my lessons and even in my research, coming back here to do more research in terms of doing case studies. And I think that would be a starting point for the purposes of policy, for example. Because one of the things that we found out was they were saying the government doesn't really appreciate the nature of the problems that the people have, but partly because there's not enough communication. So that's where researchers should come in, by probably carrying out research which feeds into policy, and maybe government could do something about that.
Professor Chizema, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.